let's kick it off, guys, with a top 5 matchup, at least according to the college football rankings. Number 5, Indiana. At number 2, Ohio State. Lots of different directions to go from here. If you're watching on the YouTube channel, you'll see Ohio State up from 11.5, minus 11.5 at home over at Bet365. Now 13.5 point favorites, so closing in on set flat minus 14 against IU. The Buckeyes favored to win the college football playoff over at Bet365 as well at plus 320. Joey Galloway will not be joining us on the show, guys. Ohio State alum discussing why Curtis Rourke shouldn't be playing in this game. But Ohio State averaging the 7th most adjusted line yards across college football up against a pretty stout Indiana defensive front, allowing the 5th fewest second-level yards, and they're also ranked 7th in stuff rate. So a matchup in the trenches for sure to watch for. Also key injury note that I'm sure Kevin will touch on as he covers the Buckeyes. Seth McLaughlin announced out for this game as of Tuesday, tearing his ACL, the Ohio State center. So that definitely pertaining to the Ohio State offensive line going up against a formidable Indiana defensive front. Indiana, though, Brett, I'm assuming you'll have some takes on this. Strength of schedule ranked 106th across college football, and the market agrees with the notion that it's going to be tough for them to upset the Buckeyes, not only when you look at the money line odds, but also 10-1 to get the number 1 seed in the college football playoff over at Bet365. So anywhere you want to go here, any bets, any overall thoughts on Ohio State, Indiana?
Well, you started where the conversation needs to start, and that's up front. It's more than just Seth McLaughlin. That's just the latest blow to this Ohio State front. We got Donovan Jackson, All-American guard. He's over at left tackle. By all intents and purposes, and Kevin, I'm sure you'll give your 2 cents here too. I thought he looked pretty good. He got his lunch money taken a couple of times by Abdul Carter, but seasoned left tackles in college football are getting their lunch money taken by Abdul Carter every now and then. But they looked really good against Penn State. Now losing McLaughlin though, that's tough. You lose your center, the kind of the captain in the middle there. We have Carson Hinsman, I believe I saw is the guy sliding over to replace him. He did start 12 games at center last year, graded kind of poorly at PFF or whatever that's worth. So we're kind of plugging in backups across the way. We're already down, backup. We are a second left guard in there. Josh Fryer, right tackle, is the only preseason starter still in his spot. And they're going up against Indiana, not to look too far ahead, but also Michigan's defensive line. They're really, really going to be tested. I thought they looked okay against Penn State. Really, they're being thrown in the deep end and told to swim here against Indiana, of course, because you're talking about the top name over there, Mikael Kamara, just an absolute monster. 53 pressures this year, 9 sacks at the defensive end position. But, that offensive line did hold their ground in the ground game. I think Ohio State may be able to run it, but I don't know, man. I think Indiana might actually be a step up in class from Penn State, which is, boy, imagine those words coming out of anybody's mouth in July. They're aggressive, they're nasty, and they're playing with their hair on fire right now. They're playing with something to prove. And this game, walking into the shoe, as the Indiana Hoosiers, they have a lot to prove here. Curtis Rourke, of course, is a beast back there. You talked about their strength of schedule, 106th. Let's get one thing straight here. You play who you play in front of you. They did cancel a game against Louisville a while ago. These games were scheduled years ago. But they're not a fraudulent team. They blew out Nebraska. I know Nebraska. 56-7. That's their biggest loss of the year by far. They cruised past Washington when Rourke didn't even play. And they're balanced, man. They're 3rd total in offensive EPA, 7th in the rush game, and 2nd in the throw game, 4th overall in points per drive. So look, if you're looking to back Indiana in this, you may want to take a different route and actually take Curtis Rourke for Heisman. I know Travis Hunter's probably got it locked up. Rourke's probably not going to be getting a lot of votes there, but if you can find a cash-out friendly book at least, you can take 30-1 right now. If Indiana wins, that's going way, way down. Maybe you can get away with a profit on that. Indiana, look, they're going to be able to throw on this Ohio State secondary, talented though they are. They struggle in man-to-man, and Indiana, boy, let me tell you, they got way better receivers than Penn State, and I know Penn State didn't score a lot of points. That was a little bit worrisome, being able to throw on this secondary here. Of course, we saw how Oregon did that. I think this is probably the best receiving core that Ohio State's seen this year other than Oregon, and we saw how that went.
Fair enough. And Kevin, I want to swing it to you, but going back to your point about Curtis Rourke, 28-1 to win the Heisman, the 5th shortest odds, but obviously a step up in weight class beyond Travis Hunter, the odds-on favorite, Genty of Boise State, and then Cam Ward of Miami. But his Heisman odds took a dent and rose up a little bit, more than a little bit, after Miami got upset by Georgia Tech a couple weeks ago. I get your point about strength of schedule, but you go back to that Washington game, for instance, pick 6 on the first possession. And granted, I had the Huskies in that game, so maybe I'm a little bit still salty with that result because I thought it was a good spot to fade the Hoosiers after the Huskies were coming off the bye week. But Kevin, your perspective on this game, Indiana, their resume coming in, obvious step up in weight class, but with all the injuries, especially up front with Ohio State, to Brett's point, can Indiana challenge Ohio State a little bit more offensively than what we saw Penn State do? Nittany Lions struggled in the red zone in that game.
Yeah, well, the Nittany Lion offense struggled altogether, only putting up 6 points. Remember, there was the pick 6 that was the other 7 points of the 13 points that Penn State had. So Ohio State did a good job there, but to Brett's point, to everybody's point, it starts with the line, and this is really offensive line 4.0 for them because they lost Josh Simmons at Autzen against Oregon. They bring in Zen Mahalski. That doesn't work out. He ends up getting hurt. So then they go to the current configuration or the previous configuration of the line, and now you lose McLaughlin. So you're kicking Carson Hinsman into center, bringing in Austin Sareveld as your offensive guard. So how is that going to hold? I'm a big proponent of looking at not only at stats, but where the stats occurred. And so much of Indiana's pass rushing prowess happened in 2 Big Ten games. They gave up, it was Maryland and Michigan State. And between the two of them, 12 sacks occurred in those 2 games. Everything else has been 2 and 3 in the conference play. I'm not really concerned about non-conference, including the Western Illinois game and FCS game. I really gray those stats out because I don't care. Michigan's line, which is not the greatest line in the world, held these guys to 0 sacks. Now, I will be the first one to admit that Ohio State is once again breaking in a new line, and you're not going to be able to expect everything to work out perfectly. But I mean, Ohio State doesn't necessarily have to pitch a shutout in that front to be able to find some success. But what I think this does do is takes down some of the more complex routes. You're not going to be able to be doing double moves and things because I think the clock is going to be sped up with all of that. Ohio State should be getting tight end Will Kacmarek, the transfer from Ohio University, back. I think that's big in terms of their blocking tight end. I think they're going to run a lot of 12 personnel with him and G. Scott in as your tights. So you look at what Indiana has done this year against who it's gone against. And yeah, it has beat everybody but Michigan by 14 plus points. And that is impressive. It's hard to do that against your 2s, let alone an opposing team. But this is, for Curtis Rourke, this is going to be by far the biggest game he's ever come into, the former Ohio University quarterback, not playing in the cathedrals of college football in the MAC. Then you look at where they played so far this year. At UCLA, where there are more tarps than fans, Northwestern, which is a converted soccer practice facility, and then Michigan State, which has already packed it in by this point of the season. So, I think that there are all the things, and I'm hearing some of the names coming out. Rick Neuheisel saying that Ohio State could be in trouble, some of these others, but, I don't see it. I've already made my score prediction. I don't think I put it out there yet. I think I overcorrected from the Seth McLaughlin injury, and I think I took the line down too far, and now I'm kind of regretting it. I kind of want to get in and change it, but once you make it, you're stuck. So Ohio State is still a favorite for a reason. This game is in Columbus. Ohio State has owned the series since 1990. I mean, you're looking at a tie in 90. I think that Indiana's last wins came in 87 and 88. What does that have to do with this year? Nothing, but it's still something worth talking about here on the shows.
Right. And you look at turnover margin, Indiana ranking top 20, and this is a point that I like to make to wrap up the conversation, Brett, a lot. And I know in your articles from time to time in college football, you take a look at variance, especially when it comes to preseason and maybe some underlooked, undervalued conference title odds. When Indiana doesn't get that early break or havoc-driven play, maybe we don't want to call it a break. The one time we saw the Hoosiers deal with any sort of adversity was when they were down 10-0 at Michigan State. But to Kevin's point, maybe Michigan State was a little more locked in at that point. Hoosiers blow them out the rest of the way. What happens in this game if Indiana gets down 10-0?
if that's going to happen, it's going to happen in the second quarter on, because Ohio State's gotten off to a lot of slow starts this year. I mean, we saw it against when they went down real quick against Penn State, and you almost thought, oh boy, what the heck is going to go on here? Eli, they had a slow start against Akron, man. I mean, it's been the name of the game this year. They have to have a better first quarter against Indiana. They can't be plotting this 0-0, 3-0, not converting in the red zone or whatever it might be, turning the ball over early, because that's going to give Indiana the door. It's going to crack the door open, and as we've seen Curt Cignetti do not just at Indiana but his whole career, you leave that door cracked for him, he's going to bust it in. I'm not saying that Ohio State's in trouble by any stretch here, but I don't see that early down 14-0 after 2 possessions for Indiana and see how they respond after that. It could be a 10-0 halftime deal there rather than early on in the game.
Fair enough. And Kevin, just based off of your outlook on the game, it seems like maybe you think Ohio State, conversely to Brett's point, can get off to a hot start.
Well, here's the thing, and obviously my play in this game would be Indiana. First half spread, I think, is where I would look at this game.
Okay.
But, Ohio State has faced a lot of teams that are trying to take the air out of the ball right off the bus. 2 possessions in the first half, 3 possessions in the first half. That's not what Indiana does. Indiana has had the open week to try and, maybe work on some things, but your successful teams are not the ones that reinvent themselves every single week to try and fit right into the keyhole against who it is that they're going against. You find things that you do well and you go and do them. So I think we're going to see Indiana run more offense, which means that I think Ohio State has the opportunity for more offensive plays. But you better get the Buckeyes in a decent position before you get to half, because Ohio State has outscored teams something along the lines of like 121 points to 9 in the third quarter. It's kind of outrageous, but I don't think that Ohio State's necessarily going to get off to a slow start. But what I am concerned about is that Ohio State will be kind of looking and feeling with its new offensive line. And if you're running a bunch of inside zone and you're at 3rd and 8, and then you're having to sit there on an obvious throwdown, and you've got the pass rush coming at you. If Ohio State has a couple of empty series to start things off, I mean, we're back at square one. So, I think Ohio State has to be mindful of it, paint the edges, do some things along those lines, but certainly applying that pressure right out of the gate of getting up and, scoring on 2 of your first 3 possessions, 3 of your first 3 possessions would certainly go a long ways to making this a game for that only last 2 quarters versus 4.
First half line for this game, by the way, over at Bet365, Ohio State -7, total of 26.5. Maybe we do see some points early on, but to Kevin's point, depends on how Ohio State's offensive line plays with dealing with a couple key notable pieces, including, or most notably, McLaughlin and the adjustment there. By the way, I wanted to also note as we record across the board, including at Bet365, the tough situation with recording during a couple days in advance of a game. Sometimes we do see the market adjust within a matter of a couple hours. And we're recording this here on Thursday, November 21st. Buckeyes down from now close to 14-point home favorites to 12-point favorites. Still a total of 51.5. So some money has come in on Indiana literally as we record this podcast. So maybe anybody was somehow got in the back end of Riverside here as we record and taking a look at Brett's take on the game. We'll see.